Good morning. Hi, I'm Cindy Franklin. I'm the Director of the Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office. I want to welcome you to our training this morning. Thank you for coming. And I want to let you know a couple of housekeeping matters. The restrooms are off to your left down this hall. The training is 1 hour, and we're going to reserve 1 hour after the training for questions. The questions, we would really appreciate how questions. This is a how training, not a why. So we're not going to spend any time on questions of why the regulations are the way they are, why the buffer zones are what they are. Those are unanswerable questions at this point. We're trying to move forward into getting applications through and getting on to the next step. So if you will keep that in mind when we get to the question and answer period, that'll be great. I want to make some introductions to you for those of you who are not familiar with our staff. We have about half of our staff here this morning. So your trainers this morning are Sarah Oates, who's our Records and Licensing Supervisor, and John Calder, who is our Administrative Officer. We are filming this session, and we filmed yesterday. We're going to take the films from the 2 days, which are an identical training on both days, and make a video that we're going to have up on our website by next Wednesday. So our filmer is our Administrative Assistant, Naomi Johnston. And these people in these chairs up here are these people over here. Jane Sawyer is one of our business registration examiners, and Joe Samaniego is our administrative assistant. And these are members of our staff that you'll get familiar with as you apply and work through the process. Back in the back, we've got James Holscher, who's our enforcement supervisor, and Joe Bankowski, who is one of our Anchorage enforcement officers. Scott Stairs back there, he is the supervisor of the Department of Revenue's enforcement team. So we would like you to know our staff and know us. And I'm just going to take you through a couple of housekeeping slides and then let you get right into the training. So a question that we got yesterday is when on February 24th is the application and supplemental forms going to go live on the line, and the answer to that question is at 9 a.m. The IT team wants to be able to get in, have them all on site, just in case. We think everything's going to go very smoothly, but we all want to be here and be ready if anything goes wrong right at the beginning. So the Commerce IT team has built this database for us, which our team is going to review with you today. And before we get going, I just want to take you through a timeline synopsis, and then Sarah and John will take you through an overview of the application process, how to initiate an application online, and the supplemental forms and steps. So on February 24th, we're going to begin accepting applications online. You initiate the application online. There really isn't any reason to come to our office on February 24th. If you come to our office, we're going to hand you a little card that says, go apply online. So you need to start that application. We're not going to have any kiosks or anything like that at the office where you can do it there. So you really need to start sort of out wherever you are. And then on April 27th, we're going to have a Marijuana Control Board meeting in Anchorage. At that meeting, we expect any course applications for the marijuana handler permit education course to be approved by the board. So we're not going to be able to take on online applications or any applications for handlers permits until May 12th. That's to give people a couple of weeks to take the course, any course that's approved by the board on April 27th. May 23rd is the date that the marijuana inventory control tracking system is going to be implemented. And we're still in the protest period for that bid, so we're not going to discuss that today. June 9th is going to be the meeting in Anchorage where we expect the board to issue the first cultivation and testing licenses. So we're going to take applications for all 4 types of licenses, actually all 6 types of licenses, beginning on February 24th. But the only license applications will be moving through to completion for the June 9th meeting, consideration by the board at the June 9th meeting, are those for testing and cultivation facilities. The reason for that was discussed at the board meeting last week, and that is because a retail store in a product manufacturing facility cannot comply with the regulations until we have some legally grown crops of marijuana for them to produce or sell. And so that is it is a plant, and so that is a process. Some time has to pass for those crops to reach their ready point. And then we'll have a meeting in early July where the board will continue to approve cultivation and testing licenses. So those are brought in batches to the board, depending on the timing of the process, as you'll see when Sarah and John take you through that. And then in September, our expectation is to have a meeting the first week of September, approximately 90 days, perhaps a little less than 90 days past the June 9th meeting, where the board will approve the first retail and product manufacturing licenses. And then finally, we'll have one last board meeting in Anchorage in December, sometime probably the very first week of December, and the board will continue to approve. So when you look at these timelines, it's really important to remember that this is not a race. There's no window where we're taking applications. There's nothing closing. There's no limits on the number of licenses the board can issue. And when you look at that timeline, if you recall, the statute says the board is going to approve or deny an application within 90 days of it being submitted. We have a similar timeline on the alcohol side. And there's a couple of things you need to realize about that. First of all, the regulations say that the beginning of that timeline is a completed application. So you're going to be doing some work on your applications before they're complete. And the timeline doesn't start ticking until your application is complete. Second of all, the board meetings aren't going to line up perfectly with all of your applications. You don't have to worry about that. If you come to an alcoholic beverage control board meeting and watch carefully and listen carefully, you'll understand how an all-volunteer board that meets 5 times a year manages to keep with those timelines. There's a tool that they have called delegation that enables them to look at mostly complete applications, and if the next board meeting is going to be too far out from the date of your completed application. I'll let Sarah and John go into that a little bit more, but the thing to keep in mind is that there isn't going to be a situation where if you don't get your application in on February 24th, something terrible is going to happen. If you apply on February 24th, if you apply on March 1st, if you apply on March 11th, all of those applications are theoretically going to end up at the same board meeting, okay? So what you need to be thinking about as a potential applicant is, when am I going to be ready, okay? If you're not going to be ready within 90 days of the date you begin your application, you should ask yourself why you're starting it now. Because you're going to set off eventually a timeline for us, and we're going to have the expectation that you were ready. And then the last thing I'll say is, and this is up on our FAQs, a lot of people ask me, what's the first thing I need to think about when I'm applying for a license? These are premises-based licenses. No one is going to get a license and pick it up and walk around town with it and say here or here. You have to know where before you start. So if you're not ready, don't start. Nothing will happen if you don't start, except that you will start when you're ready. Right? There's no window that's closing. It's not a race. And so you need to have your stuff together and be ready and sort of be within 90 days of being ready to go at the time when you apply. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to turn it over and have a good training.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Oates, and as Cindy said, I'm the records and licensing supervisor, so I'm sure I have seen many of you and will continue to see many of you in the future. I'm going to take you through a flow chart of the application process, how you initiate it, and then what happens when it's deemed complete. So first, you're going to initiate your application online, and John is going to take you through that process here in a few minutes. Once you have initiated your application and entered in all of the information and are ready to begin your public notice, the online application system is going to produce some documents for you to help you with the public notice process. So there are 3 parts of the public notice process. The first part is you are going to print out 2 copies of your application. You're going to post one up at your proposed licensed premises for 10 days, and you're going to post another one up at a conspicuous location in the nearby area, like a post office or city hall or a grocery store bulletin board for 10 days. The second is the online application system is going to produce the verbiage that you'll need to bring to a local newspaper, and that's going to run in the newspaper once a week for 3 consecutive weeks. And the last form of public notice is to notify your local government. And this is in advance to actually submitting your complete application, and there's a reason for that I'll go over here later. So while your public notice process, we're going to take questions at the end. At the very end. So while your public notice process is going along, that 3 weeks for the newspaper and the 10 days for the posting, you'll want to simultaneously work on your supplemental documents. And there are a number of supplemental documents that you'll need to submit along with your online application. And I will go through those supplemental documents later. So while you're working on your supplemental documents and doing your public notice, you're also going to want to contact your local government. Because it's very likely that your local government is going to have additional requirements, whether it's their own licensing system or a conditional use permit. You're going to want to contact them and start working with them to get those requirements met as well. So once your advertising requirement is complete, then you're going to submit your supplemental documents and all of your affidavits to the board, to us, to AMCO. We are then going to enable you to make your payment, your license and application fees. And once those are made, then you're going to have one of our 4 business registration examiners review your application and your documents for completion. If one of our examiners deems that any of your forms are incomplete, they will contact you and say, this is what you need to do to complete your document, or you are missing this document or this item. Once you believe that you have completed the requirements that the examiner informs you of, then you will resubmit those documents, and they will again review those documents right away, and the process kind of goes through until your application is deemed 100% complete. So once it's deemed complete, 2 things are going to happen. The business registration examiner, well, the director through one of our examiners, is going to send a notification to your local government. Your local government will have 60 days to protest or to waive the right to protest your application. Now, we're also, at the same time, going to schedule your license application, going to put your license application on our next Marijuana Control Board meeting agenda. And we do that because the delegation, we're going to use a delegation tool that Cindy briefly mentioned earlier, and that is, say our next board meeting is June 9th, for example, and you submit your application at the end of May, mid-May, May 15th. Well, that's obviously not enough time for your local government to have their 60 days to determine if they want to protest your application. But we also have a 90-day requirement to put your application in front of the board for them to decide to approve or deny your license application. Many of you have followed the ABC board meetings and know in our ABC board statutes and our marijuana statutes that we're required to meet 4 times a year, once in each judicial district. Often the ABC board meets 5 times a year, twice in Anchorage, and we anticipate that the Marijuana Control Board will be doing the exact same. And as you know, 5 times a year is around 90 days, a little less than. So it's very important that we use this delegation tool. So say the local government has not had time to give their input, or if we send notice to the state fire marshal and we need to make sure that you have your building up to code and they haven't had time to weigh in, we put it on our delegated consent agenda and we say, hey board, here's this application. We think it looks complete, but this applicant still needs to work with the state fire marshal, get them their building review plans, and we're still waiting on that. So then the board will say, okay, well, it looks good. We're going to approve this with delegation. We're going to give delegated consent to the director so that once we receive all of the approvals that we need, then the director can go right ahead and schedule the initial inspection for you and get your license to you without having to bring it back in front of the board. So the only time that we would need to bring it back in front of the board is if we do end up receiving a protest from your local government. So now I'm going to have John go through the initial online application process with you.
How's everybody doing? That good? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the initial application process online. Before we go there, before I show you guys this, you see the word disclaimer up on this slide. It's there because of a couple things. First of all, what you see today may not be 100% to the finest detail exactly what you see on the 24th. Everything that we have right now is still in production, so we're working on it. We may make tiny tweaks to it, but the feel, the look, and the idea behind what you're going to see today will be the same. It's a pretty self-explanatory process. It's pretty user-friendly, so it should be pretty similar. This is a screenshot of our marijuana application page, which is not available at this time. It'll be available later. But some of the things that you're going to see on this web page are these icons. And that's because it's in production. It's in test, if you will. And so this is an example of the application page. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger for you. So like I said, this page is in production. It's not available to the public at this time. If you found it somehow and you went there, none of the links are going to work. It won't be ready to go until the 24th. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to go after it. When it does work, what you're going to see is this button right here in the center of the page, Initiate Marijuana Application. Before you click that button, read the words on top, above it. One of the things we want you to do is make sure you've read the final regulations. Make sure you understand everything that's in there before you initiate an application. If you have questions, read our frequently asked questions. We're still working on updating them. We've been continually updating them and posting up new and different versions. And we're going to continue to do that throughout this process. And then the training video from today and other training materials will be available on this site as well if you need help with the application process. When you click on this button, Initiate Marijuana Application, it's going to redirect you to this page here. And you will use a valid MyAlaska login to access the system. So we'll do this. So you enter in your login and hit enter, and it will redirect you to this page. This is your account home. So on your account home, it gives you, right now, because you've done nothing, you haven't initiated an application, there's not much for you to do other than to click the button that says apply for a new license. So you click this button and it takes you to the new license application page. The first thing you need to do is enter in your Alaska business license number. So I'll do that, and then you choose a marijuana license type, whichever one it is you're applying for. We'll do a retail marijuana store. And then when you click on that link, it will redirect you to the application information page where you will enter in all of your pertinent information. And I see the circle of impatience is moving rather slowly today. There we go. So if you want to apply for more than one license, so you want to apply for a retail marijuana store, a marijuana production facility, and a marijuana cultivation facility, you can do that, but you have to initiate them one at a time. So what that would look like is if I had gone through the process and I initiated my application for a retail marijuana store, then when I log in again or I go back to my account home, you can see here's my initiated application for my retail marijuana store, and the button apply for a new license is still available. Now I can apply and start putting in my information for my marijuana cultivation facility or my marijuana production facility. So we can stack licenses. If you're going to have a retail marijuana store or marijuana production facility or a marijuana cultivation facility, what's the one license type you can't have?
Testing.
Say it louder.
Testing.
Good, very good. All right, so you go back to the new application page. This is where you're going to start entering your information. The first field that you can enter in is the designated owner. And so the designated owner is our point of contact for this license. It's the person who is going to be monitoring the phone number that you enter, monitoring the email address that you enter, so that if or when we have any issues with your license application and we need to contact somebody, this is the person that we're going to contact. They are the person who is responsible for the operation of this license. And so it's important that you put that person down. You need to enter a valid email address. And you need to enter in latitude and longitude. The reason that we are going to have you enter latitude and longitude is that we've experienced difficulty in some cases in alcohol licensing where we have a licensee who gives us their address as mile 61 of the Glen Highway. And that's a pretty large area. So this helps us narrow it down a little bit with the latitude and longitude. The other thing is that in the future, eventually, we would like to create maps of where all of our licensees are. And we could kind of see it and create mobile applications for our enforcement officers when they're out in an area doing walkthroughs, doing meet and greets with people, doing inspections. They can look on their application and say, you know what, I can see where everything is, and I can see when they've last had an inspection or when they need an inspection, and it creates efficiency and reduces costs all the way around. So that's the reason for the latitude and longitude. You will enter in your latitude and longitude in degrees, decimal degrees. So if you're familiar with latitude and longitude, this is a more uncommon format for entering it, but this is how it goes in there as a fraction. You make this a little bit bigger. Your longitude needs to be, both latitude and longitude need to be valid Alaska latitude and longitude. If you enter one for the lower 48, it won't take. The other thing that you have to understand is that it didn't work here when I clicked. I entered 149.886. Why didn't it go? Anyone know? Minus sign. Right? Longitude goes two ways from the prime meridian, so positive and negative. So here you need to enter the minus sign. So you need to enter the physical address. This is the physical address of the premises. I'll enter in the address for the Atwood building. I doubt we'll ever have a license there, but you never know. Okay, so another thing to note is these fields can collapse when you come onto the new application page. They should appear open, but if they're not, then you just need to expand these fields. For the owner information, notice that it pulled the Alaska entity number over from corporation and professional business licensing database. When I entered in my valid business license number, it pulled the entity name and the entity number over for you. So you enter in a valid, not that one, valid phone number. Sorry, I can't see it up here. There we go. And an email address. Again, it's important that we have this so that we can get a hold of you. Same thing with the address. This is the address for the owner, and you need to make sure it's entered in there. Okay. So you get the owner information entered in there. This is what you will have on file with corporations' professional business licensing. So if you have 3 owners, you need to enter each owner in as an affiliate. And you'll do that by pressing the Add Affiliate button. And so you'll choose the affiliate type, either individual or entity. So each human owner in this business, regardless of whether they're a primary owner or part of another entity that owns stock in the company or owns a percentage, you need to enter in their information. If you're a sole proprietor, let me enter in a business license number for a sole proprietor so you can see what that will look like. So what you can see here is Louise Test is the individual, the sole proprietor of this business. And when the owner information is a little bit different because the owner, the business license I entered in my first example was an entity. It doesn't have social security number or date of birth there. But because this is a sole proprietor, then this is where that owner information gets entered. Does that make sense? So if it's an entity, then you enter in the affiliate's entity information. You must then go and add an affiliate for every human owner of that entity. Any human who has a financial interest in the business needs to have their information entered as an affiliate. So we have Joe Schmo, we'll make this Steve Schmo. Okay. Your date of birth must be entered in a fashion that will make you 21. If you don't, if it's not 21, if it's under 21, you won't be able to continue. Same thing. Okay, and so maybe this information is probably going to be different for your affiliates than it is for the owner. Notice that the state is automatically Alaska. You can't have an address in any other state, right? If you're an entity or an owner. So once I've got everything in here, I can go ahead and submit the application. If I'm in the middle of this thing, I just started entering in information, and my car starts sliding down the icy driveway, and it's out in the street. I can hit Save Progress, and it'll save everything for me and take me back to a page. It's going to take a few minutes here. It should be. See if it does it now. So it'll take me to a page here where I can come back in at any time when I log in using my My Alaska account, and then just click Continue Application. So I click Continue Application. I come back in here. I make sure all my information is good, or I finish entering my information, and I can submit it. When I submit it, it's going to take me to a license review page. And we're running off of a VPN right now, so it's a little bit slower than it will normally be. So the first button you're going to want to press is the review application. So this is all the information that you entered, and it appears as a PDF. So you come in here and you just check everything. Yep, designated owner, Joe Schmo, Steve Schmo is my entity affiliate. Everything looks good. If it is good, you can highlight the bottom here in the PDF and either print or save the document. But then go back and hit Submit Application if it's good. If it's not good, then you can go back to your license summary and correct any information that you found to be incorrect. Once you submit the application, it brings you back to this page. So this is, you see the license number. That's the first thing to take note of. This does not mean that you have a marijuana license at this point. This number will be your license number should the board approve your license at their next meeting, but this is just a placeholder, if you will. Also notice that the status is initiated. So if you start an application and you don't enter all the information and you save it, and you don't ever hit the submit button, the status will be new. Once you've done this, the status will be initiated. And then throughout the life cycle of your application or license, this status can change. So when it gets granted, the status will be active. If years down the road you run afoul of the board, it could become suspended. It could become revoked. So there's all different types of statuses, but your status will be right there. On the right, you see actions and documents. This is the important part for you. So you have that advertisement notice. If you click on this, it opens up a PDF with the exact verbiage that you can send to whatever newspaper you're going to publish your once per week for 3-week advertisement. And you can, again, print or save it digitally, however you want to do it. You can hand carry it to them. You take it to the newspaper, they print this, and you have them run it once per week for 3 weeks, and that satisfies your advertisement requirement. For your public notice requirement, click the public notice button, and again, it creates a PDF for you with the exact piece of paper that you will post on your place of business or your proposed premises and at a conspicuous nearby location, like a post office bulletin board or a grocery store bulletin board. Notice that the social security numbers have not been included here. All of the affiliates are included, but nobody's social security number is on there. So again, you can print or save this. You're going to want to print at least 2 copies. You might print more for your records. And then lastly, you have your standard cover page. This cover page auto-populates for you. It's a form that you will attach to any other forms or information you send us. If you bring us your fingerprint cards and your check for your fingerprints, you'll bring us with this form. If you send us an email with all of your other supplemental forms that we're going to go over in detail here in a few minutes, this form will be attached to it. And it's again, auto-populated with the information that you entered when you initiated your application. And this is just so that you may send us 5 or 6 of these things, and we get that you don't want to fill out the same information every time. Maybe it's even more, maybe it's less. It just depends on what you're doing. It has a space for your attached items, so you can go ahead and in this place say what it is you're sending us. Think of it as a cover sheet for a fax. And again, you can print or save this document at the bottom. So back on our license page, a couple other things. You can grant user access to other people if you wish. So they don't have to have your My Alaska ID to log in. I wouldn't want to do that, right? It's what you use for your PFD. So if you want other people or other business partners to have access to this information, you can grant them that by reading the instructions here and entering their email address, and then they can get access to this page as well. The other thing that you'll want to take a look at is right here, and this is an important part, the events. You expand the section that says initial application, and these are all of the additional forms that you'll need to complete in order to have your application deemed complete. You'll send us these forms and these documents after your advertisement has been met. So you can send us all this stuff at one time. That's the absolute preferred method. If you send it in parts and pieces scattered out over 3 to 6 weeks, it makes it very difficult for our people to track it and get it in there. If you get everything at once, we'll show you how we do that, then that's best. Once we receive the items, what we'll do is we'll go in and mark them as received. And what that will look like, hopefully, we'll see if it does it. If it's going to allow me out. Yeah, it did. So let me just sign out and sign back in real quick. Oops.
If it logs you out, does it save what you've already done?
It has for me when I've been testing it. Absolutely.
Will it for us?
Oops, I hope it is. Here's what I wanted to do. Okay, so here's an example of the same business license information, but with this information marked as received. So once we've received everything, we'll mark the date in here. So if you apply on February 24th, chances are you won't be ready to send us everything until roughly around the middle of March. March 16th is the date I picked. I put it in here. So once we receive everything, we'll make your online payment available to you. So you can see down here the fingerprint fees, your new application fee, and your retail store license fee, and it's pay online button. If you click that button, it will redirect you to, this is test, so it'll look very similar to this when it's live next week. You can pay with Visa, MasterCard, or Discover card. Our alcohol licensees can also pay with Diners Club. Does anybody have a Diners Club card? I don't know if it'll work on this system. I think this online system's a little bit different. If you were to call in, we could take that card. But this is what it'll look like. So you can pay online with a credit card or debit card or whatever it is. Then after you've paid online, where did it go? Sorry. After you've paid online, then we can go back in and start reviewing for completeness. And when items are complete, we'll post them up there as complete. If they're incomplete, then you can go on there and look and see that they need to be revised. So that's the system in a nutshell. That's pretty much every functionality of it that I could think of that you need to know. Where do you get these documents? You get them on our website at the marijuana application page. We'll have a link to this page on the front page of our website, underneath the word marijuana update, and we'll also have a link over here on the left-hand navigation side that says marijuana applications. And then what you'll see down here is the supplemental application documents. The first thing you'll see is the supplemental application document process. And if you expand that link, we'll have a checklist here for you to use. We'll have a flow chart that you'll see later on in this presentation that's very similar to the flow chart that Sarah showed you. It just delineates the whole entire process. We'll have the videos from today on this website as well, so that you can come back through and watch if you have questions. And then, just like your licensing application showed, we have everything laid out in the same format for each different license type. We will also have a button, we're working on it right now, that will have the future supplemental forms that we discussed at the last board meeting. Those will be up on here as we develop them. Those are the renewal forms, the transfer forms, things that we don't need to have for quite a while. Those will be on here as well as marijuana handler permit information. That will also be here. So those buttons will be up there by next week. The content might not be live because it's not a priority right now, but we'll have the placeholder there so you know where to find it. So these right now are not linked. They will be linked to the forms on the 24th. And whatever facility or whatever license type you're applying for, you just expand that section and you can pull down your forms here. They'll open as PDFs and you can print or save them. You can fill them out online and then save them. What you're going to do to submit them is at the bottom of the page, we have this button that says Submit Supplemental Forms and Documents. So you click that link and it will open up an email. It's going to take a few minutes here. I didn't have my email open while doing this so that we aren't getting constantly bombarded by those little email flashes that pop up on Microsoft. So it'll open up the email for you and it'll automatically address it to marijuana@licensing@alaska.gov. So if you have questions pertaining to license issues or your license, the application process, you send them to marijuana.licensing@alaska.gov. It also has the subject, completed supplemental forms. You can go in here and say, retail marijuana store license for AK Alchemy or whatever the name of your company is. We can only receive 20 megabytes at a time on our state system. So if all of those forms make the attachment size too large, then figure out how many emails it's going to take and put 1 of 4 in the subject line as well, so that we know. Or you can zip the file if you know how to do that. You can just zip it, make it smaller, and send it to us in that way. But try to make it as clear as possible so that we can process your license as smoothly as possible. That's what we're looking for. So this is the webpage. Again, it'll be available at 9 a.m. on the 24th, so next week. And before then, nothing will be live on this page until that morning. But this is where you will go, marijuana applications on our webpage. Anybody, we'll save our questions for this process until the very end. What you'll want to see now, I imagine, is the forms. And so Sarah's going to come up and go through each of the individual forms that you'll have to attach to your application in order for it to be complete.
All right, so the first of the forms is going to be the cover sheet. John already went over this a little bit, but I'm going to go over it a little bit more. As he said, this is generated by the online application system. You will probably use multiple copies of this form, and the top section is auto-populated, so you'll just need to fill in this bottom section. And the purpose of this form is to help both you and to help us as applicant and as the examiners processing your license. Because with alcohol, it's common for us to get envelopes with a check, just a check. No license number, no nothing. We have no idea what it goes for. And we don't know who to contact sometimes, and it makes things very difficult. So this helps us know where the documents are supposed to go. And furthermore, you can list in here the attached items that you're going to include so that we can verify that everything that you say that is on this cover sheet that should be attached is actually included. And we can contact you right away if we notice that any of the documents that you have listed or items that you have listed are not there. This next form is MJ00. We have given form control numbers to all of the forms that we have produced and that we provide for you to make it easy when we're speaking with you on the phone or emailing you to reference. So this is your application certifications. This needs to be completed by each proposed licensee and or affiliate. And so that means with one application, if you have 5 shareholders for a corporation that is applying for a license, each of those 5 shareholders is going to need to complete this form and submit it before your application can be deemed complete. And the reason for this is because we asked some questions that one person can't certify for other people. One of the questions, for example, is, do you currently have or plan to have an ownership interest in or a direct or indirect financial interest in another marijuana establishment license? And as you guys know, if you have, say, a retail store, if you're applying for a retail marijuana store, you cannot apply for a testing facility. So this is just kind of a heads up, and it may be that one shareholder has a stake in 2 different corporations that own 2 different licenses, and it's possible that the other shareholders may not be aware of that. Other things on the second page, these are all certifications that need to be initialed. So a lot of these certifications have to deal with the prohibitions in Article 1, for example, or in 1738. For example, I certify that I am not currently on felony probation or felony parole, or that I have not had a felony in the past 5 years, because that's prohibited by statute, right? And how can one shareholder certify that the other shareholders do not have a felony? It may be that one of their partners has had a felony and has not disclosed that, because that's not usually something that people like to brag about. So that's why each applicant needs to submit one of these forms. On the third page of the form, are 2 different questions, and you're only going to answer one or the other. The first question is for those who are applying for a marijuana testing facility, and the sector that you're going to certify, sorry, not answer. And the second is for those who are applying for all other license types, and it's essentially saying that I'm not going to apply for a license type that is prohibited by statute. And then you'll see that there's a place for you to sign it in front of a notary. You will notice that for the forms that we provide, they all need to be notarized at this point. We are hoping eventually in the future, probably not this year, but maybe next year, that we will be able to have forms completed with an e-signature and done completely online, like your PFD. That's not an option at this point, so they do have to be notarized, but we're hoping in the future for that. And just for the record, we don't need original copies of the forms, so as long as you notarize it and we can clearly see that it's notarized, or sorry, have it notarized, you may scan, we prefer that you scan and email these items to us so that we aren't flooded with tons and tons and tons of paper because we have a relatively small office. So our next form is the general operating plan. This is required by all applicants for each license type. And the general operating plan has to be, like every field has to be completed. Each field has to be completed. If you have a formal operating plan of your own that you have typed up and is nice and neat, and you would like to attach along with this, you may, but each field in here still needs to be completed answering that question. You will notice that on all of our forms, the first page looks very similar. This one is slightly different because it has a couple of fields on the bottom for the mailing address and primary contact, which should be identical to the information that you have included in your online application. But we like these to be uniform. The first section of this form talks about what is this form, and it will cite the statute or regulation reference that explains why this form is needed. We give a little bit of information on what this form covers. For this one, for your operating plan, there are different sections that cover security, inventory tracking of marijuana and marijuana products, employee qualification and training, waste disposal, transportation, signage and advertising, and a control plan for persons under the age of 21. This is a very long form. It's a 19-page form. And throughout the form, you'll see different kinds of questions. There are questions where we expect you to write answers, like the ones that you see on the screen now. And there are also yes and no questions. And these yes and no questions are all prefaced by a sentence that says, or a couple of sentences that say, all licensed marijuana establishments must meet minimum standards for surveillance equipment. Applicants should be able to answer yes to all items below. So that's a pretty good indicator that you should be able to answer yes to all of these things. If you find that you aren't able to answer yes to every single one of these questions, then you're going to need to review your operating plan, make some adjustments to your operating plan, or to your proposed premises so that you can meet these operating requirements. And at the end of this operating plan and a couple of the other supplemental documents, the very last page says additional space is needed. So if you don't have a formal operating plan and you run out of space in one of the sections to answer that question, fill it out as much as you can, and then at the end just say see attached page, and you can print out as many copies of this last page as you need. So this next form is MJ02, and it's your premises diagram. And again, you'll recognize the first page, and the familiarity of the first page. We have a yes or no question asking whether you're going to attach your own blueprints or CAD drawings. We want to make that option available to you because the second page of this form is an empty box. And some of you, I'm sure, are fabulous artists. I am not. So I would, if I were applying for a license, be attaching blueprints or CAD drawings so that it's very clear what my proposed premises is going to look like. You may use this box, of course, but if you would like to attach other diagrams, you're more than welcome to. The first page is mandatory. The second page is not necessary. So please just indicate in the yes or no question if you intend to attach your own diagram. If you do attach your own, please make sure that you meet the requirements of what needs to be included in your premises diagram. Those requirements are listed briefly on the first page and a little more in detail on the second page. You must show all entrances and boundaries, restricted access areas, storage areas, and the dimensions. Certain license types may have additional requirements for what needs to be included in your premises diagram. For example, a cultivation license, you'll need to indicate what areas you plan to have under cultivation, particularly for a limited cultivation license, since it's restricted to 500 feet. It's very important that that is indicated in your diagram. So the next set of forms are labeled MJ03 through MJ06. So depending upon what license type you're applying for, you will be filling out one of these 4 forms, unless of course you're applying for multiple license types, in which case you will apply for use the corresponding form. I'm going to use MJ04 as an example here, but just for your reference, MJ03 pertains to retail marijuana stores. We picked 03 because it corresponds with Article 3, which deals with retail marijuana stores. MJ04 is marijuana cultivation facilities, and the limited cultivation facilities will also use this. MJ05 is for the marijuana products manufacturing facility and the marijuana concentrate manufacturing facility. And MJ06 is for the marijuana testing facility. So on these supplemental operating plans, you'll need to complete these and include these in addition to the general operating plan. So each license type has additional requirements for what needs to be included in the operating plan, in addition to the general operating plan. So we decided it would be easiest to create separate forms for those instead of having in the general operating plan, if you're applying for this license, answer these questions. So some of the things that you'll see covered in your supplemental operating plan are things like prohibitions. For this one, it also includes your cultivation plan, odor control, testing procedures and protocols, and additional security questions. The next form is MJ07. It's your public notice posting affidavit. So as we've said a couple of times, as you know, the public notice includes a 10-day posting of the application at your proposed premises and at a conspicuous location nearby. So once you've completed that 10 days, you are going to fill out this form. And we do not want pictures. We get this question all the time in alcohol because they have an identical posting requirement. We do not want pictures of, showing that you posted your application. We don't need the copies of the application that you posted. All that you do is complete this affidavit, it's a sworn statement, of course, saying that you have met those requirements, and you're going to fill in the start date, the end date, and then the second conspicuous location that you have posted those applications for the public to be informed. And of course, you're going to sign in front of a notary once you have done this. Please don't fill out this application until after that 10 days is complete. We see people certifying that before their 10 days is complete in alcohol, and we make them redo their posting affidavit because you can't swear that something has been done before it's done, right? So the next form is this local government notice affidavit, MJ08. And this is where we ask that, we require that you notify your local government if you are located within one, along with the community council for applicants applying for a license in the municipality of Anchorage or within the Mat-Su borough outside of city limits. And the reason for this is because we at the agency and your local governments get tons of questions for alcohol licenses, saying, hey, I saw this ad in the paper, these people are applying for this license in a hotel off of 4th Avenue, what is this? And with alcohol, we don't have a pre-notice requirement that they inform us before they start doing their publication. And so the public usually knows about applications before we do with alcohol. So for this, it gives us a heads up, and it gives your local government a heads up that you intend to apply for a license. And furthermore, it also creates a line of contact with your local government. So as I said earlier, as I was going through the flow chart, you will want to contact your local government to find out what specific requirements they will have in addition to our state licensing process. So it gives you that form of contact with them. So once you have notified them, you can either send a copy of that application that the same application that you're going to use for your posting. You can either email them a copy of it, or you may mail it. Some places may let you hand deliver it, but you'll want to contact your local government to figure out what the best way to get that information to them is. Once you have notified them, you'll write in this line who you sent it to and the date that it was submitted for Anchorage and the map 2. You're going to also enter the community council who you notified of the community council. And then again, you'll sign this in front of a notary saying that you swear that you have met those requirements. So this next supplemental form is not a form that we provide for you. It's even easier because you don't have to fill out anything. This is your affidavit of publication, and it is produced by the newspaper who runs your ad. So after those 3 weeks are complete, once a week for 3 consecutive weeks of your advertisement, notifying the public of your license application, then the newspaper is going to produce this affidavit for you, and they'll either mail it to you or you can go pick it up. And a couple things that you'll notice on here are a copy of the actual advertisement that was posted, or that was published, I'm sorry. And the dates of publication are listed in there so that we can ensure that those dates are correct, or that you met the requirement, excuse me. And it's almost always notarized because you've got the newspaper certifying that you have met the advertising requirements by going through their paper. So this is Form MJ09. It's your statement of financial interest. We have one of these for alcohol as well. This form is essentially a sworn statement that no person other than a proposed licensee has direct or indirect financial interest in the business for which you're applying for a license. A second certification listed on here is that any ownership change shall be reported to the board as required by regulation. This needs to be submitted by each applicant, each proposed licensee or affiliate, just like that first form that I showed you, MJ00. That's required by regulation, so we will have multiple copies of this form for many of you. Oh, and just for the record, you see there's a social security number field on there that will not be available to the public, of course. So the next required supplemental form is proof of possession of proposed premises. We fondly refer to that as POP at AMCO because it can be a tongue twister. So this is a deed or a lease. So at the time that you apply for your license, we must receive a valid signed deed or a lease, and showing that you have right to possession of the proposed premises. Now, a couple of key things to note that we see being errors in alcohol are, say you're part of a corporation, or say I'm part of a corporation, I'm part of Marijuana Control Board Inc. And I'm 100% shareholder of Marijuana Control Board Inc. And I'm applying for a license. I need to make sure that my deed or my lease shows Marijuana Control Board Inc. as the lessee or as the owner of that property. If it says that Sarah Oates is the owner of that property, then I, Sarah Oates, will have to create a lease to Marijuana Control Board Inc. to be the entity that has the right of possession for that property. And so it's basically a matching game. View it as a matching game. Whatever you list on your initial online application as the proposed licensee, so the owner name that's going to be listed on your license, that is who should be listed as the entity or the individual who has right to possession of that property. Another thing is please make sure that the address that you have listed on that document matches the address that you have listed on your application. There are a lot of places that have a lot or block number for your deeds. Within the municipality of Anchorage, and I believe also the Matsu Borough, there are online tools that have a connecting document for those. that say lot. If you enter in your physical address, it'll pop up the lot and block number, and you can print that and include it to have the docs connect. But we have no way of knowing otherwise that lot 4, block 7 is the same as 550 West 7th Avenue. So please make sure that there's a paper trail connecting the dots so that we can see that yes, you do in fact have right possession of that specific property. So the next required documents are your entity documents. And how many of you are familiar with Snow City Downtown? Okay, so we are using their LLC as an example here, and I'll explain why in just a second. But so as you see here, there are different shareholders listed. There's the mayor with 6.5%, who I'm guessing won't be applying for a marijuana license. You've got a couple of other shareholders with 9-10%, and you've got one who's got 56.88%. If you add up these numbers, they are not going to equal 100%. And the reason for that is because Division of Corporations only requires that you list your shareholders with 5% or more. That is not consistent with the AMCO requirement for a marijuana license that you list all of your shareholders. Because of HB 123 passing, that says that no licensee with any ownership may have a felony in the past 5 years, we have to know 100% of the ownership of your license. So you do have the option with Division of Corporations of listing all shareholders. They may not put those on their website for you to see on this page right here, but there is a place down lower, which you can't see in this screen, where you can click on different links and it will bring you to a copy of the paperwork that you submit to them, and that would show all of the shareholders. So there is a requirement that you guys list 100% of the shareholders, whether they have 1% or 0.5% or 100%. You need to list them all, and you're going to require that you submit a copy of the paperwork that you send to Division of Corporations to us. So that way we can see that you have listed all of those shareholders and we know exactly what's going on. At this point, our online application system doesn't have a section for you to enter in the percentages of stock owned by shareholders. We're hoping to have that in the future, but we don't have that right now. So it's really important that we can see that through your Division of Corporations documents. So next up is your fingerprint cards. And one fingerprint card is required for each proposed licensee or affiliate. In alcohol, we have people submit 2 cards or 3 cards or 4 cards for one person, and that's fine. You can do that. And some people do that because they're afraid that 1 or 2 of their fingerprints may have been smudged on their original card. It's very important that the prints are clear. Most of our approved fingerprinters in the state do a great job of doing fingerprints. Some of them not as much, especially the ink roller ones, when they do get smudged. When we receive these, we send them over to the Department of Public Safety, and they do the background checks for us. And we have about a dozen or so cards get returned to us every year by the Department of Public Safety because the fingerprints are unreadable, and we have to then contact the licensee or the applicant and say, you need to resubmit your fingerprint cards because we can't read them. So we don't want you to have to go to a fingerprinting place and pay for them twice. So please make sure before you walk out of there that they're clear and you think we'll be able to read them. And so that's going to bring me to the next slide, which is your fees. So your fingerprint fees are $35 per person. So if you submit 6 cards for one person, it's still $35 for that person. And that $35 is not a fee that we keep. We are charged $35 per person by the Department of Public Safety, so we forward that over to them. As many of you are aware, a new application fee for all license types is $1,000. And your license fee varies depending upon the type of license that you're applying for. So there are 3 license types for each. The 3 license types that are $1,000 are your limited cultivation license, your marijuana concentrate manufacturing facility, and your testing facility. And so the retail marijuana store, your standard cultivation facility, and the marijuana products manufacturing facility license are each $5,000. And we do accept, as John said earlier, credit cards, Visa, MasterCard, and Discover, and you can pay those online. That's easiest for everybody, I think.
Those are non-refundable, right, if you don't pass your test, they're right,
So we're going to take questions at the end, and I would love for you to ask that question at the end, because it's a great question. And it is in the regulations. So if you look at Article 1, the end of Article 1, it tells which fees are refundable and which aren't. We also take checks, and we're going to take cash. So this last slide is your resources, and I may have not articulated this earlier. I think John did a little bit, but please, please, please use your resources. So Washington has 300 people to do all of their marijuana and alcohol. For our licensing section in Alaska, I have 4 examiners plus me to do all of alcohol and all of marijuana. We have 1,875 alcohol licenses, and who knows how many marijuana licenses we're going to have, but there's not going to be a limit, right? So we could have just as many or more. So please use these resources before you pick up the phone, before you send an email, because it's been crazy. The first is obviously our website. If you don't know this already, please write it down, or this will be made available to you. You can always Google ABC Board Alaska or Alcohol Marijuana Control Office Alaska, and it should bring you to our homepage. Or like this gentleman in the front's doing, take a picture. Take a picture of this slide. The second is our checklist. Oh, sorry, I want to articulate on our website a little bit more. If any of you were following our website a year or 2 ago, you would have noticed that we didn't really update it super often. Once every board meeting or so we would update it. Now we update it a lot, and we're going to continue to be updating it very regularly. Please use this as a tool. It will be very helpful for you. We're going to have a lot of resources on our website, which are listed below. So the checklist, it will be made available on February 24th. This is going to be a checklist for the documents that you're going to need to submit. We have multiple variations of the checklist all over the place. It'll be on your online application system. It's in other places on our website, but we're going to have a copy that's going to be a PDF that you can print out, so you can check it off or do whatever you want with it. We're also going to have some detailed application instructions. We have a set for alcohol. We're going to have probably a more detailed set for marijuana. They're almost complete now. Those will be available to you on February 24th. Please use those. They should be very helpful for you for filling out the applications and the forms. I don't expect you to remember 100% of what we reviewed here today, but we are recording this, as Cindy said earlier. We've got 2 cameras going, and we are going to put a recording of this video. We're going to have a couple videos available on our website for you to also reference. And John had mentioned that our admin assistant, Joe San Diego in the back, produced this beautiful flow chart for us. So this is similar to what I went through with you at the beginning of the presentation about the whole process, all of the steps of the process. Please feel free to print this out, because this will be a great resource for you. So you know what's coming up next, or you know what to anticipate. And then our frequently asked questions. We've got a bunch of frequently asked questions on our page. We're going to be updating those frequently. At this point, we can only guess the kind of questions that we're going to be receiving about the application process. We probably have a pretty good guess about what we'll be receiving. But once we actually start taking applications, after February 24th, I'm sure our inboxes are going to explode. And so we're going to continue to update this very, very frequently. Please use these frequently asked questions, because a lot of the questions that I have people walking up and asking me are answered on our website. And lastly, if you have exhausted all of our resources and still have a question or need assistance with your application process, you may send an email to marijuana.licensing@alaska.gov. If you have licensing specific questions, like application questions, please use that email. If you have questions that aren't specific to the application process, just general questions or a question or a comment about the regulations, we have another email address that is just marijuana@alaska.gov. So please use that too. As many of you heard at our last board meeting last week, we presented to the board the marijuana mailbox. They'll be getting that at each board meeting, and that's going to be any questions or comments that we receive at the marijuana@alaska.gov email. All of those are going to be presented to the board at each meeting. So keep that in mind when you are writing to that address. And if you have any questions about things like local zoning laws or building code requirements, we don't have those answers to those questions. So I would ask that you work with your local government and work with your local fire department or food safety department to answer those specific types of questions that aren't addressed in our regulations. So now we're going to take a 5-minute recess so that our camera operators can get set up for our Q&A session. And so feel free to stretch your legs, and we'll take some license-related questions here in a few minutes.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm just curious, if we're operating in a Matsu Borough in an unincorporated area pertaining to the local government notice, do we have to, are we notifying the Matsu Borough? And then on top of that, do we also have to work with the community council in that area?
So you would notify the Matsu Borough, and if there is a community council that is active in your area, yes, you would also notify them as well. There is no requirement that you go to their meetings and talk to them or do any of that kind of stuff. Just send them a notification.
Okay, and one last question. If we have a storefront, are we allowed to operate a business in that storefront before we were to convert it to a retail dispensary? You know, obvious we're not selling marijuana products, but could we have a t-shirt shop in that location doing branding and merchandising and then transition once we were licensed?
We've got this question in the FAQ, and our analysis of it was, it's a free country. You can operate a shop anywhere, but what you need to understand is that you shouldn't open a shop in a place where you can have a t-shirt shop, but not a marijuana store, and then come to the board with the expectation that because you've already opened that location, even though it's zoned out, that you're going to get some kind of exception to the zoning requirement based on some reliance argument. So as long as you understand that you're proceeding at your own risk in identifying a location that may be appropriate for t-shirts but not zoned for marijuana, it's up to you.
So that's why we highly emphasize that you work with your local government in advance to opening up something like that, to make sure that it would be appropriate for both types of businesses.
My question is, you said you have to contact the local government, and for Anchorage that would be the Muni. Who needs the copy? So does that go to the prosecutors, the Muni? I mean, where do you want it sent when we're contacting our local government in Muni?
So for your early notification, the one that you are doing right after you initially apply, you're going to identify who you notified, if you recall, in the affidavit. We're going to have the official notification from us when the completion occurs. And so we're in the process right now. Naomi is in charge of our notification list. So she's in the process of creating a list of who the regulations require that we notify when your application is complete. We have contacted most of the local governments. We did not think of asking them whether this same individual that they've identified for us to notify is who you should notify. So I'm hesitant to tell you today, you know, it's Mayor Berkowitz or who it is, but that part of the notification is yours, and you're going to indicate on your affidavit who you notified. So if you take it up to the city clerk's office, you're going to write on your affidavit, there's a line there for who you notified. This is how I did my early notification. We're going to have an email list. We're going to email your completed application to the individuals that the community councils, the nonprofits, and the local governments have identified as their preferred contacts for the official notification. If there's a point in time when we can loop back and release those names, we will. I just don't want to make a promise today because we've been pretty frantic getting all this work done, and that's maybe a little nicety. I would anticipate at some point in time we would have it on our website, but I can't promise we'll have it by the 24th.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we were doing the notification. Thank you.
If we plan to operate 2 licenses in one building, what rooms can we share in common? Can we share a common bathroom, break room, lunchroom? I know you need separate entrances, but any
So-
info on that?
I think this is a good example of a proactive versus reactive question. So this is exactly the kind of question that is going to be sort of answered as we move forward. I think you're going to be checking the regulations, and if you have a cultivation and a retail store license, for instance, you're going to have a premises diagram for each one. If the premises overlap and there's shared space between the two, you're going to put that on your operating plan, you're going to bring it to the board is going to look at it, and if the board has any issues with it, it will identify it for you. But this is the exact kind of question that our staff isn't really going to be able to look at everybody's application and say, this looks good or this doesn't look good. It's going to be a process of you sort of taking the bull by the horns, drawing your premises diagrams, explaining this is where they overlap. Here's the bathroom that's on both premises. Here's the break room that's on both premises. And then those are going to go before the board, and it's one of the many things that the board is going to have to work its way through at its initial meetings where it's looking at its first operating plans. And everybody will get an idea of whether there's problems. Any problems, and that's what the reading of the regulations is for, right? Any problems that you could see there, you should be able to identify yourself by reading the regulations. You're not going to put your cultivation canopy in the middle of the customer area of your retail store. Why? Because the regulations prohibit that. And so you're going to be able to see by reviewing the regulations what you think you can do, and then you're going to be bold, and you're going to bring it in your operating plan, and the board's going to take a look at it. Okay?
Okay, good answer. I just have two other real quick questions. On your MJ09 statement of financial interest, there's an amount specified there. What sort of verification of proof are you looking for on the amount? Is it a certified financial statement by a CPA, or do we just write an amount?
So I'm guessing you're looking at one of the draft forms?
Yes.
Okay, so at the board meeting last week, the board voted to remove that section from the form. So the current form does not have the particular section that you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
I can bring you through it really quickly. That's the first page of the form, and there's the second page of the form. So you'll see that that entire section at the top of the second page is gone.
Were you referring to a different draft form that was different from this?
No, he's got.
I think he's just talking about the first page of the form.
I've got the
You
first
would
page.
pull
I've
that
got
out.
all
Can you
first
get
page
it
of
where
the
it is
form.
there? I think he's asking
For an amount?
which line are you looking at?
Well, on page 1, it says name, address, and then amount. On what I've got. Let's see. Is that page 1? You sure?
Yes.
This is page 1.
Okay, so my page 1 is different.
Yes, section 3.
Section 3.
Yes, so section 3 of the draft that was presented to the board was removed. So I think you've got an old draft.
Sorry about that. Last question on the lat long. Can we go to Google Earth or we go to planning and zone?
Google Earth is a great tool.
Okay, thank you.
We make our way around and we'll come back.
Thanks, got a couple. As a property owner, I can have multiple different licensed entities as long as they're different licenses on the property.
So if you're the owner of the property and you're not applying for a license,
I'm not involved with those businesses, I just.
you're not applying for a license, then those individuals applying for the license will be bringing that to the board, and the board will make a determination on each application as to their premises.
Well, specifically, we are moving forward with a cultivation, and in the future, I want to get into the making of the goods.
So I don't understand, are you saying you're applying for a license, or are you
Our
saying you
group,
want to be the?
our group, I'm the landowner, we have a group that we're doing, we have a corporate. We have a
Right.
corporate group.
So the question is the question whether you can have multiple premises on one piece of property?
Yes,
I believe the answer to that is yes, subject to the board's approval.
as long as there's leases and everything's structured correctly, that is allowable. Secondly, do officers or shareholders have to be the primary contact?
A person who, one of the licensees, one of the proposed licensees does need to be the responsible contact, yes.
And if you're an agent, a non-shareholder, can you be affiliated with other licensed businesses? It's just the shareholders that can't interact with the different businesses, correct?
You can own multiple types of licenses with the prohibition being if you own a testing facility. You can't own any of the other license types, and the same goes for agents and employees.
So agents and employees cannot have different.
That's correct. It's very clearly stated in the regulation.
Okay. And PFD is a requirement, right, to be a ship?
Yeah, the residency requirement for PFD, you have to be able to meet that residency requirement at the time of application.
Cool, thanks.
Yes, so when you're applying for the application on the website and it requires you to do the My Account, are you able to create a My Account under the business entity, or is it going to be tied to an individual's login?
I believe it's tied to an individual's login.
There is a place, and I don't know if, I wasn't in here when John was doing his, so I didn't see if he covered this or not, but there is if you have multiple owners of a business, there's a way in our database to indicate others who can see, so that you can get multiple people in looking at your application as you're moving through it. But each person will, you're just adding emails at that point, but an individual has to have the My Alaska ID to get it going.
Thank you. I've got one confirmation and a couple of questions. The confirmation is, I heard in the last MCP board meeting that the seed to sale company that you're currently working with, going with, is Franwell. Is that correct?
The notice of intent to award, the contract was to Franwell.
Okay, so if everything goes as planned for Franwell, I guess, and for y'all, does that mean that we will not be able to use any other seed to sale software tracking such as BioTrack THC or MJ Freeway?
Whatever you use in your business, if it can connect to the state seed to sale software system, then you may use it. But typically, those systems that you specifically refer to are the type of systems that would be a state vendor rather than an individual licensee. They may have software that will interact with the state vendor, and the API that John discussed is the means to get whatever system that you have connected if you choose not to purchase their software.
Okay, so I'm not trying to sound confrontational here, but if for example, I use BioTrack THC, Franwell is direct competitor with BioTrack THC, so they would have no want or reason to work with BioTrack THC. So would I pretty much not be essentially forced to use Franwell if you choose that?
The regulations require that you use the state's marijuana inventory tracking system to participate in the market. You don't get to choose your own marijuana inventory tracking system. You have to use the state's. It was a competitive RFP process, completely transparent. If you followed along, it was run by the Department of Commerce's procurement manager. And so it's very transparent. You can go back and you can trace everything about it that the public is entitled to know about the procurement process.
Sure.
So you have to use the state's inventory control system to track your marijuana.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, can you elaborate a little bit more on the license premise? For example, if I'm operating on a 5-acre parcel and I live on part of that parcel, it's not in this borough, in a different borough, no building codes, no zoning or anything, could I have a license premise be one building on said property and then, for example, live in a different building, or even have a different business on a different property on the same, or a different business on a different building on the same property?
I would say yes. It often happens when someone's licensed premises isn't their entire parcel of land. It would just be the building or whatever that you would wish to be part of your licensed premises. So that's up to you to determine what you want to be included, as long as it meets the regulatory requirements.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anybody up front? We'll start at the front, work our way back again.
My question is about business licensing, how you're required to have a business license initially. When you do apply for Alaska business license, it requires a line of business to be listed. Is it acceptable to list all other lines of business? Because there isn't a NAICS code for cultivation, for example.
Sure, so that's a question that we got a couple of times yesterday, and the answer is that we don't have an answer to that. We are not Division of Corporations, unfortunately, so I would highly recommend that you contact them and ask how to proceed. There are many other agencies and divisions who are doing their part to work on this whole marijuana project, not just us. And so I'm guessing that they probably addressed that internally, and they probably have an answer for you.
They may or may not. I've received several phone calls yesterday from people who spoke to them. But the important thing is we don't have a requirement as to what NAICS code we use.
Clarification on something I heard back here. Multiple businesses in one location. If those businesses are not all related to the cannabis industry, can you have another business in the same facility if it's in the right zoning?
So we don't deal with zoning, and we don't regulate other businesses besides alcohol. So there is a prohibition on having your marijuana premises be the same as an alcohol premises. Other than that, we don't regulate those. So as long as the prohibitions and the regulations aren't violated, then I would think that
It's a highly regulated industry, so if you want to bring a less regulated business into your highly regulated premises that are subject to inspection and subject to all the requirements, that's going to be up to you, but you're going to have to realize that whatever you include in that diagram, that your marijuana licensed premises is subject to all of the regulations on a marijuana licensed premises. You can't come in and say, oh, this is the corner where we just sell t-shirts, so we're going to let under 21-year-olds in this corner. No, because it's in your diagram. If it's in your diagram, it's 21 and over.
Yeah, are you guys going to be addressing the issue of possibility running co-ops? So, for instance, hypothetically speaking, if one were to own a big facility and get a standard cultivation license, would I be able to hire other cultivators and possibly section that off and have them work for my standard cultivation license?
I think you're talking future. You've got the 4 license types. You've written the rules around the 4 license types. You want to get going with the 4 license types. Let's get going with these 4 license types, and then see what happens. 6. Sorry, 6.
If an entity would like to invest, but none of the employees or officers of said entity are investing personally, what's the procedure for addressing a situation on the application?
So you're guided by the regulations here. There's a definition of direct and indirect financial interest. You're going to disclose everyone that has a direct or indirect financial interest, and each of those individuals are going to be part of your application process. They're going to be identified as affiliates. They're going to file certification, and they're going to sign the financial interest form. And that's really, that's all the guidance we can give you on that. So you need to read the regulations, decide who has a financial interest in your business, and disclose.
Okay, I just want to take us back to the real property issue again. So just to confirm, LOIs probably not that right? Have an LOI on the property.
Right, I got that question yesterday. Yep.
And then an option agreement, found by consideration, not going to work, right?
Well, we're looking for proof of right of possession of the premises, and so if we look at a document, and we do have this happen on alcohol, sometimes we look at a document and our examiner says, does this show that they have a right of possession? The funnier it looks, the more attention it's going to get from us, and the more likely it is to be taken to the board with asking the board to decide whether or not this document actually shows a proof of possession.
Okay, the majority of my leases that I've negotiated for my clients have options in them that it releases them from the lease if they don't get a license. Does that cause you any issues?
I don't think so, as long as they've got the proof of right of possession to the premises. We're gonna be looking at to line it up next to the regulation and make sure it matches.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think so, we're good.
Scenario, I have a piece of land, I have a land lease on that land for say 20 years. I want to build a new 10,000 square foot cultivation facility. I obviously don't want to spend that $2 million to build that facility until I know I can have a license. So under the application, as I was watching through there, we could show we had site control through a land lease, but the building may not be built until after the license is created. As long as we have stamped plans that shows the building being built, will you then somehow like contingently grant the license, let us go out and build it, then you can come back in and inspect for the security, make sure all the features we put in is that anticipated within your application process to do that sort of system?
Short answer, no. Long answer, we have this happen all the time in liquor licensing, and people really struggle with it. Part of the risk of entering a highly regulated industry is that you know there are no guarantees. And so you're looking, as all business owners are, to away for a guarantee in a no guarantee environment. If you're not 90 days away from somebody walking in the premises and looking around and saying, yep, you're ready to go, you should wait to apply, because there's no limit on these licenses. You don't have to rush in and get a license on the contingency that maybe someday you're going to have a building there where you're going to do something. So you have to make the business decision of whether you're going to invest and work your way through the licensing process. You know, we want to issue licenses. The board wants to issue licenses. We've built these rules to issue licenses. So it's not a game, but it is a high risk venture. And if you start a license application process for a building that's not built yet, you're not likely, it's not going to be ready in 90 days. So you're going to hit a wall where the board, we're not going to delegate these licenses for years and let them sit in a drawer for years. And so the advantage for you is you're not competing in an environment where there are limited licenses, and if you don't apply now, you won't get one. We'll still be here when you're ready.
So does that logic then also flow to say tenant improvements? I have a warehouse, I haven't gotten into my $500,000 in tenant improvements, I have it on my lights. As long as I can get that work done in 90 days, is that something the board would then, I mean, are you looking for everyone to have everything done before they apply?
You're going to work your way through this process. You're going to fill out these forms. If you can fill out these forms and you can get it to the board, and then you're going to, I mean, part of that is your fire marshal approval, right? Your fire marshal isn't going to approve if you're not ready. And so we're looking for a readiness aspect when you apply. And again, if you're not ready, then just wait to apply till you are ready.
Yes, hello. So what happens if you have your application denied? Is there any wiggle room, like you can work out where you went wrong with your security system, or are we brought in to have any kind of help when the board is reviewing, or do we get called to help?
First of all, there's specific regulatory reasons for denial. So that's where I would start if I was worried about my application being denied. You have to picture the board having to articulate a reason why they're denying your license. Are they denying it because the municipality protested, because you wanted to open it in a place that wasn't zoned? There's strong legal support for them to deny a license in that scenario. If it isn't a trick like, oh, you have a light that's 2 feet off, denied, okay? What's going to happen is that you're going to submit your operating plan. You're going to say, this is what our place looks like. The board is going to look whether it checks all of the boxes related to the regulations. If the board issues the license and one of our investigators goes out to do your preliminary inspection and sees there's a light that's 2 feet off, they say, hey, this light looks like it could be over there. Could you move it over there? And you'll say, yes, that would be great. I'll move it over there. And they'll say, good, now it looks good. Here's your license. And so we consider our licensees to be our community, and our officers are community police officers. We want you to succeed. We want to get you your license, We're gonna work with you, but we want you to work on it too. So we don't wanna do all the work, we want you to do most of the work, and we will identify any area that's looking concerning. You could have an issue on completeness, you're missing something. If you saw the little chart that we made, you went back, you didn't get booted out, okay? You went back and we said, here's what you need, and we're gonna work with you, we're gonna try to help everybody get through this.
That's reassuring, thank you.
I have similar concerns to this gentleman over here. I meet the zoning criteria. There's no issues with that. I'm concerned with the public notice. I live in a community that's very divisive, and some people don't like to see other people succeed, and I don't want to build my building or facility when I'm not sure that there's going to be a problem with the public. The community I live in is not going to have any regulations. I'm just worried about the public.
So a couple of things. Number one, risky business, okay? Number two, whoever applies now is going to be the first. And so there's some cultural issues to overcome with this industry. And we like in alcohol to encourage our applicants to be good neighbors, to attempt to open dialogues. Our alcohol board, when someone comes in with a neighborhood fight or a NIMBY fight, not in my backyard, that kind of thing, our board tends to turn all the parties back and say, can't you go work this out? You know, our board doesn't like it to be in the position of that. I would imagine things will be the same with a marijuana board. If someone comes forward with an objection to your license, the board is going to have specific regulatory parameters for denying a license. In other words, the board is going to have to decide that it is not in the best interest of the public to issue that license. If you think that everybody loves alcohol licenses, you're wrong. If you went to the last Alcoholic Beverage Control Board meeting, there were multiple objections to the renewal of licenses, and they all came out differently. So these are you know, nobody is going to be able to guarantee you're going to be okay. Okay, this is a risky business. The more you can communicate with your neighbors, make your own case, convince them that you're going to be a good neighbor, the better shape you're going to be in with the board. And it's going to get ugly if you come in and you say, you know, they're just all, you know, in the last century, and if everybody's in the board name calling and having an ugly name calling fight, that's not going to be a pleasant decision point for the board. So as a responsible business owner, what you want to do is engage in as much outreach early on as possible, be a good neighbor, have somebody on your side, you know, think creatively about it and think about the position that the board is being put in. Don't get your heels in and get stubborn, okay? You guys are breaking new ground. It's risky business, right?
Thank you very much.
Yes, on the indirect financial interest, if an investor is going to invest money but they won't be given corporate share, simply be paid back principal and interest, do you deem them to have an indirect financial interest? Would they be listed?
Read the regulation, make your own determination of who you're going to disclose, understand the risk.
So in the regulation paperwork under the license restrictions, part of it talks about a misdemeanor crime involving controlled substance, among other things. Would you count something like an OUI or a DUI as a misdemeanor crime involving a controlled substance?
If you go look at Title 11, the Crime of Controlled Substances Act, you're going to find all the crimes in that section. I think it's 1161 at sec, I guess is what I would say. They're called mixed crimes, misdemeanor, you know, misconduct involving a controlled substance. 1171, thank you. I'm getting corrected by someone more knowledgeable than me about the Controlled Substances Act. DUI is in Title 28. It's a vehicle crime. It's not going to qualify.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks again. My question is pertaining to the on-site consumption endorsement. I know that they're in the early stages now, and I'm not looking for any specific answers. I'm just trying to anticipate, will the on-site endorsement be granted, would we expect that those endorsements would be handed out around that time, or would it fall subsequent?
It's a great question. Two things about that. Number one, the board is going to control the timeline of the regulations process to the end point of adoption. After that, everyone should be kind of calculating in their heads about 45 to 60 days for law to review, get it to Lieutenant Governor, get the signature, and then get an effective date, which is always going to be 30 days from the Lieutenant Governor's signature. It's going to be close. But the other thing to realize is the on-site consumption endorsement is going to be subject to, probably going to be subject to a separate right of protest by the local government. So you could have the situation where the on-site consumption endorsement is not allowed in your jurisdiction, and you won't know that until the regulation is adopted by the board. So there's a bit of uncertainty around that right now. I wouldn't count on getting it unless you have inside information.
So if we did initiate that, the application or the process for the endorsement, is it going to follow the same public notice timelines, like 60-day notice for the local government to protest and those kind of things?
Yes, and there'll be a separate application for it after the regulation is adopted.
So as far as that goes, in the edibles, there's a non-consumption clause in there. As far as the edibles, there's a non-consumption in the statutes. But what about as far as like you're making something to eat? Is that going to change at all so you could try what you're making to make sure you're not making something that's horrible?
The board had a lot of discussion at one of their meetings about employees testing products. Like a lot of discussion, and Cindy, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but if you're making something that doesn't yet have THC in it, I think you can test that and maybe anticipate what it would taste like with THC in it. But at this point, I don't believe the regulations allow for.
Well, I know they don't at this point in time.
You're talking about in the future?
But in the future, you're talking about adding totally different flavors to something. What it tastes like without it is going to be totally different than what it tastes like, and you don't want to experiment on other people.
So this definitely falls in the question of the why, why is the board's policy what it is? And
Oh, no,
those kind of things. So, I understand your concern, but I think that, I don't think that's a question we can answer today. The board, these are regulations. The board is going to come back and make adjustments. The beautiful thing about it being regulations is that the board can come in and open a regulations project. If the board decided tomorrow that in the April meeting that the 10-mile buffer zone around an opt-out was really needed to be fixed, they could fix that, and they could fix it this year. So this is a fluid situation in the sense that the regulations are what they are now, but if you as an operator identify areas that really need work, that's what that marijuana at alaska.gov box is for. That's a direct line from you to the board. We're going to be taking all the emails we receive at that box to the board meeting, every meeting, and the board is going to be looking for feedback from the industry on what's working and what's not. And so it doesn't all have to be perfect right at the beginning.
Thank you. Listening to your presentation in terms of the operating plan, it sounds to me like you don't want us to give you our 200-page policies and procedures manual for how, what we do every day in the cultivation facility. You don't want to end up with all this extra data and pages that you have to pour through for no reason. Is that correct? What you're really looking for is is how the company will be implementing those issues as opposed to getting our, three-ring binders full of policies and procedures?
For the most part, yes. There are certain regulations where it asks you to provide that specific information. On February 24th, you'll obviously be able to see the operating plan form, and there are some questions where it just is a yes or no statement that you will be providing like your policies and procedures or whatever made available to your employees, that kind of thing. That's not an exact question, it's just an example. So in some cases, we do want specifics, in other cases, we don't.
I will say that's why those instructions on that form say don't just attach. Don't say see attach, see attach, see attach, because at that point you're making the staff do your work for you. Anytime we identify an area where you're trying to reverse that on us and make us do your work for you, you can bet that with 4 BREs, we're going to immediately identify that and flip that back on you and say, no, you do the work and we'll review it.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, very much.
We would refund those fees. All right, so next question?
A couple of questions. First question is on ownership interest. How are you going to handle a family trust that may be an investor in an entity, as far as how you list who the individual is on that trust, and also how you basically have fingerprints provided for a trust? Because if technically there's really no owners of the trustee handles the trust. The beneficiaries could be small children, grandchildren, and you certainly, I don't think, want a bunch of kids and grandchildren's names on that application. So how have you guys worked through that issue? What are you going to do about it?
Well, we don't know what the board's response to the idea of a trust owning a marijuana license is going to be. But we do know that every application and ownership interest must be reduced to a human being who can be fingerprinted. There's no other way for us to handle it and meet the statutory requirement that no one with that felony conviction own a piece of a license. And so if a family trust in which the beneficiaries are children applies for a license, it may be that they all do have to be listed. It's not a situation where you can find a legal entity and insist that that legal entity is exempt from the requirements.
So how do you do that with public companies like Princess Cruises and their liquor licenses and their lodges? Certainly you don't have all of the stockholders of Princess Cruises giving you fingerprints. So how do you handle that provision for public companies?
This is an area where liquor licensing is not a perfect analogy, because liquor licensing does not have an out-and-out prohibition on any individual with a certain criminal history owning a license. And so the board on the alcoholic beverage control side has the discretion. And because of that, and because of the way the liquor license rules are written, that less than 10% ownership does not have to be disclosed, it's a different animal. And so that statutory prohibition against any individual with a certain background having any ownership interest in a marijuana license is what makes these rules more complicated, and what may end up having certain type of entities that is a practical matter in the current regulatory and licensing environment can own a license. So,
Well, what statute do you base that on? I mean, a trust is a legal entity that's allowed to be in business here. It's allowed.
I'm not getting an argument with you today. So one of the things is that as the board works through applications, every separate factual scenario has to be worked through by the board. So if you want a trust with little children to own a marijuana license, we will work through that with you. Okay?
Children don't know that the trust owns it.
Got it. We'll work through it with you. Okay?
I didn't see American Express listed on online payment. Is that something that can be given in person?
The state of Alaska doesn't take American Express, I believe, because their fees, but we don't, I'm sorry.
Ready at the front? I'll take it. Okay. I'll give you just a second. Just changing this as well.
I don't know if this is a question y'all can answer or not, but can a residence be used as a cultivating business if it's in the proper zone?
So that's a zoning question that you would need to ask your local government. We don't have specific zoning laws or regulations, but it's very possible that local governments will have zoning laws.
There you go.
Hey there. I have 3
short questions. One of them is in regards to the community council meeting. I've already been to the meeting. They're okay with what we're trying to do. The question is, they want to know what do they have to do. When you said earlier, it seems like communication between them and the board is internal, and they don't have to write a letter or anything. How do you guys deal with that communication?
So we have a regulatory requirement to notify the community councils of any applications that have been submitted and are complete. And as do you as an applicant to notify them. It sounds like you already have, but there is particular notification. You'll still have to do the affidavit. But as far as our communication with them goes, we notify them. They do not need to respond to us. It is very uncommon for a community council to respond to us unless they do have an objection to that license, and then we hear from the community council. But oftentimes the community council works with the local government.
Okay, and this next one is regarding the security cameras. I've been unable to find any kind of standard, like a camera capable of identifying a face at 20 feet or anything like that. All it is cameras. It's pretty big. You guys have any guidance on that?
I know that a lot of you probably have specific questions about this is what the regulation says. If I buy this item, or what items can I buy that will meet that regulation? We as the staff cannot make that determination. That's what the board is for. So you're going to fill out what cameras you're wanting to buy that you believe would meet the regulatory requirement. You'll put that in your operating plan. The board will review your operating plan and determine if they're going to accept that or not.
Okay, and the last question is about the inventory tracking that you haven't chosen yet. I merely want to know, is this open source? Do we have to buy the software you guys choose or software that's compatible?
So I'm going to let John
First of all, I'll say the statement that we haven't chosen it yet is a misunderstanding of the situation. So the seed-to-sale software tracking system was the subject of an RFP, which is our state procurement process. Right now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're in a stage called Notice of Intent to Award. So the RFP process has resulted in a vendor being identified, and we're in the protest period. It's a sensitive period on the procurement side, so it's not a good idea to get into the details of this specific program chosen, but what John can tell you about is what our RFP requirements were regarding an API, regarding the ability of licensees to connect to the system.
So we required that every bidder have a system where our licensees can connect through a third-party system. So if you had a point-of-sale software for QuickBooks, then the company that wins the contract has to have an API, which is language for QuickBooks to interact with it. So you don't have to purchase their software. There's multiple means to interact with this system. Yes, multiple.
But it is your responsibility to make sure that software does interact with the one that we choose.
Okay.
Hi, I just have 3 short questions. I know that like the court usually like to have a 907 number to contact because it doesn't really do like phone calls. So for the, and I lived in Chicago for 6 months and I still have a Chicago number and that was kind of a big deal. For the number for the operational person, does it have to be a 907? Can you guys make long distance phone calls or?
We can make long distance phone calls. It's not in regulation that of a requirement for the phone number to be an Alaska number. We do, of course, have to have that person be an Alaska resident.
Right, absolutely.
But I mean, it's nice if we have a state number the whole time she was here too.
Okay, great. And then I think you covered this, but I just wasn't putting it together. But for the operational plan form, it kind of looked like you had a copy and paste. Can we just say see attached and attach another document, like the document narrative?
No, so each field does need to be completed with an answer to a question. If you need to expand on an answer, then so just put like a basic answer that would satisfy that. But if you want to expand more, then you could absolutely complete or attach additional documents.
Perfect. And then the form numbers, are they subject to change?
Probably not. The existing forms, I would say no, they are not subject. Okay.
Thank you.
two quick questions. Do like the private investors and landlords, do they need to be on the application as well?
Anybody who has any sort of direct or indirect financial interest or ownership in the license needs to be disclosed, yes.
Where's the industry getting like its pricing for everything? Are we marking off from other states or?
I think that's up to the industry to determine at this point.
No, just price for product in general.
It's not a question for your
Okay.
regulator.
Okay.
That's a kind of a industry question.
I was curious if there's going to be a page limit or a gig size limit on addenda or appendix to attachments to the questions, and if there's going to be a character or text limit for the authors for responses to questions.
We don't currently have a limit, but we would read that you remember that we have 4 examiners reviewing all applications, and the board has to review them all too.
Can you purchase several limited cultivation licenses for one site?
If they are different licensed premises, I guess.
Well, I'm talking one site.
So this is this is a super good example of something that's going to be a board decision. So if you instead of paying $5,000 for a standard cultivation license, you want to stack 4 limited cultivation licenses right on top of each other so that you can only pay $4,000. That's going to be that's an example of a place where the board is really going to have a policy decision point of whether or not and how blatant something that is maybe not what they intended by those rules. I can't say whether they would think that was groovy or whether they would think, gosh, that's just some kind of a blatant way to start ripping loopholes open in our regulations that we've just made. So board decision.
So it seems like there was not really a mechanism for using a trade name and not formally registered, or not formally registered, is that right? If you have a DBA, it seems like it has to be linked to a business license. Am I correct in understanding that?
There is a requirement in the regulations that you have a business license number, a state of Alaska business license number.
Right, no, but if you have a, let's say, a corporation, LLC, and you have different DBAs, you can have a number of business licenses for that one corporation. For the doing business as name, do you want that DBA specifically linked to the business license? In other words, does it have to be a registered DBA?
The only requirement in regulation is that you have a business license number, so I don't recall anything in regulation saying that your DBA has to be what's listed on your business license, but I guess that's a good question. So once you fill out the online application and you enter your business license number in, the only fields that are going to auto-populate are going to be the entity number and the name of the entity, the owning entity. So it doesn't auto-populate your doing business as field.
There wasn't the first example you gave us. Well, not aside from designated owner.
I'd say that the main thing is that we know what you're doing business as. And so if there's an issue with the forms that's brought up right away where it's missing a field, we'll get that fixed. But you're not going to be permitted to have a license under a name and then be out there doing business as a different name that's not on record with the agency.
Okay. Thank you.
So, following up to this gentleman's question, then if you're a sole proprietorship and you put Bob Smith Weed on your application, then do you have to have your shop called Bob Smith Weed, or can you call it something else?
We think you can call it something else as long as we know what you're calling. And so, as I just said, if we look back at these forms in light of these questions and it appears that we need an additional field, we'll create an additional field. But we're going to want to know who's behind the license, and then we're gonna know what name the license is operating under.
All right, and then further in that vein, can you let these draft forms out now so people can have an idea as to what information is gonna be needed? And also it might be experientially good for you to have it to see, you know, what problems like that might arise.
Draft forms are out there on the board packet. We did them last week. We brought them to the board. It's a public, transparent process. They're part of the board packet. You go explore our website, they're there. They have draft on them because it's not a race. You can't get started early. The forms themselves are gonna be ready for you on the 24th.
Okay, so the flow chart's out there as well, I assume?
Yes.
All right, and then so a suggestion, if you make frequent website updates, if you had a box or a corner of people calling your website daily, instead of having to reread the website and opening tabs, if you put sort of an update box, you know, new since yesterday or new June 12th might be helpful. And I guess one last question, the right to lease, is that a form on the website, or is that something you think we're gonna free-form on our own?
You provide the lease. You provide the copy of the deed of the lease that gives you the right of possession to the property.
The form you had on the TV screen said right to lease, it didn't say lease. You're not necessarily expecting somebody to lease a property and then wait 90 plus 60 days to open it when they're paying rent all that time, do you?
I don't get 90 plus 60, but yes, the expectation is that when you apply and you complete and you're ready for your application to be deemed complete, that at that time you have a right of possession to the property. There's no such thing in Alaska as a notice of intent to have the right of possession to the property, because the board has to be assured when it goes to the board meeting that you have the right of possession to the property. These are premises-based licenses.
It's 90 days for the license to be approved once it's accepted, and then it's 60 days for local government, right?
If you applied on May 12th and you got all of your documents in within 3 weeks, you might be on the June 9th board meeting. The 90 days is the outside date. And yes, you have to be, when you apply, the expectation is you're within 90 days of being ready to operate. We're going to get you to the board within 90 days of a completed application. And you're not going to be able to wait to see if your application is approved by the board to decide where you're going to operate the license. You've got to identify that as part of the application process.
So when your application is deemed complete, 2 clocks start. The first clock is a 60-day clock for your local government to protest. The second clock is a 90-day clock for the board to approve or deny your license. So there are 2 clocks, they run at the same time. Obviously the 60 days ends earlier, but it's within that 90 days.
Okay, so you could sit with your premises empty and ready to go for 90 days anyway, is what I'm hearing. Is that what you're saying?
Depending on your timing.
Okay, thank you.